All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to CSG South's fifth policy webinar of 2026. Uh, this is focused on data and degrees, the connection between education and workforce development. Is put together by CSG South's Education Committee. My name is Cody Allen. I'm a senior policy analyst with the Council State Government Southern Office, or CSG South, and I also liaise to our Education Committee, which is chaired by Virginia Lieutenant Governor Ghazala Hashmi, and our vice chair is Alabama Representative Alan Baker. Um, Before we get started with our wonderful two presenters today, just going to go real quick through some housekeeping notes and just a brief overview for those of you who are not familiar with SLC or CSG, and sort of what we do before I turn the mic over to our excellent presenters and let them share what they're working on and how they can help you. So we're a regionally based national organization. We're nonpartisan, we're nonprofit. Uh, we're funded by states to serve all three branches of state government to connect y'all with your peers around the country and around the region. Of course, in the South, we represent 15 southern states, all the way from Texas and Oklahoma up to Missouri, through West Virginia, Virginia, and down the coast to Florida. But have regional offices across the country. So I like to say we're a regional organization with national reach. Um, but we know what's working in Virginia or Tennessee or Florida is likely going to work in Alabama or Tennessee or North Carolina. And so we try to keep our connections regional and then also share best practices from outside the South when possible. We were established in 1947. As I mentioned, we have 15 southern states, but we also have 15 and growing staff. So we have a small but mighty team whose sole duty is to serve as an extension of your staff and your offices, help you connect you with resources, connect you with your peers, put together webinars like this, connect you with other leaders from across the country to share best practices, what's working and what's not. We know as part-time lawmakers and the legislature specifically, that y'all are work some of the hardest part-time jobs there are. And so we want to make sure that you have all the resources you need to be successful and serve your state and your constituents. As part of that, we also do policy research and analysis. There's a QR code on the screen, and you can also go to our website. Those are anonymous. We send in a request. We'll respond typically send you the information within 2 weeks, but we can also be as quick as 24 hours or a longer term project over a couple months to share examples of comparative legislation, uh, sort of best practices, funding issues, any issue you're working on, from things like this to education funding to gas tax and transportation funding. We're here to help. We also put together, as I mentioned, professional development programs, staff resources, webinars like this, events throughout the year to make sure that y'all are informed and connected. We also connect with strategic partnerships with our different state organizations, like the folks presenting today, as well as other groups like Casey Family Foundation, international delegations like the Consulate of the Netherlands, Germany, and just groups around the country. Lastly, real quick, be remiss if I didn't plug our Southern Legislative Conference. It's the largest regional gathering of state lawmakers in the country. Typically anywhere from 1,400 to 2,000 attendees. This year's is in Lexington, Kentucky. You can register now. Registration closes, I believe, at the end of May. But we also have on-site registration, but I very much hope to see all of you there. So with that, thank you for letting me hog the mic and share a little bit about our organization. We're very pleased to be joined this afternoon by two fantastic presenters and experts, Ms. Heather McKay and Ms. Wendy Kank. Wendy is the current executive director of the Virginia Office of Education Economics, and Heather is the Senior Vice President of Employment Engagement and the Executive Director of the Strata Institute for the Future of Work, as well as the former inaugural Director of the Virginia Office of Education Economics. So Heather and Wendy, thank you so much for joining us. And before I turn it over to y'all, I'll just note that we have time at the end for questions. So please write them down and we'll have time to sort of ask both of our presenters at the end. So with that, thank you to everyone for joining us and thank you to Heather and Wendy, of course. And so I will turn the screen sharing over to y'all.
Great. Thank you. I'll pull up our slides. It's great to be with all of you today. Thank you so much for joining us. And Wendy and I are going to talk to you today about connecting education and workforce and really thinking about how to use data for both legislative work in your state and also for decision making and policy and practice. And I am having a little trouble moving my slides, so um, I'm gonna stop share and maybe ask you to pull up those slides. We practiced, but it didn't work at the end of the day. Sorry about that. But I can keep going as the slides are getting pulled up. Um, we are presenting to you an idea that moved forward in Virginia and that the Strata Education Foundation is also promoting, which is that states develop capacity to begin to look at education to work data more comprehensively and not tied or aligned to their federal and state reporting, right, as a separate tool for decision making and supporting the work that they're doing in the state. And the work that we're doing at Strata is really built off the work that I did in Virginia and that Wendy now leads. And so we're excited to share with you some of the pieces of the puzzle that we hope will help other states to create offices like this or capacities like this, right? I don't think it always has to be an office. Thank you so much for pulling those slides up. I apologize for that. Um, so right now we know that education and employment data systems and data work and the ecosystem, right, operates in various silos. We also know that each system has separate goals and outcomes that they're working towards. And really the missing link here is often that this work isn't combined, done together, and we're not really thinking about education to actual job. And why that's important, right, is because we want strong regions, strong economies, and we want good outcomes for our learners and workers. So there's both this economic component and also this educational component at the end that we're thinking about. Can we switch to the next slide? Great. What we know, right, is that stakeholders need clear data-driven insights to translate uh, to how economic opportunity can happen, understand where gaps exist, and to fix the challenges and problems. And in most states, this isn't really happening that comprehensively, right? We've got some shining lights like Virginia on the line today and Kentucky, where this work is happening regularly. But in most places, what states are doing is that kind of regular reporting that they do for iPads or for WIOA, right? The things that are kind of the have-tos, not the supportive pieces. And many states also still really lack the components that are necessary to understand what we can achieve from education and training programs or what the outcomes actually are. And that is really that employment piece, right? I used to stand in front of the legislature when I was leading VOE at different committees and folks would say, you know, what are our history majors doing? And really, I couldn't answer that question. And so filling in these gaps to try to make better choices is what we need to do. Next slide, please. Um, and and sort of the why now, right, is that there's a lot going on, right? We've got these labor shortages in key industries that are happening. We've got ups and downs in different fields. Um, Computer science is one that's hitting the news all the time, right? We're learning that there's entry-level hiring changes happening there, and we need to understand them. We've got this rapid tech disruption, and AI is creeping into every industry and occupation in different ways, and we need to start to understand it. There's these fiscal pressures that are on us, right, to make sure that the education and training that states are doing leads to a good return on investment, that we've got healthy economies, and of course, we've got these mobility concerns for folks. Next slide, please. So one idea that we've put forward at Strata and that Wendy will tell you about is working in Virginia is this idea that states establish capacity to do this work, to bring together this education, economy, workforce systems, economic development, and begin thinking as one in a talent strategy and using data to guide decisions. And so we're asking states to develop capacity to do this. And states are doing this in different ways. Wendy will tell you about what's happening in Virginia. Indiana just passed some legislation to establish a capacity like this within their economic development unit as well. Mississippi is beginning to do some of this work in Mississippi Accelerate, and some folks from Mississippi may or may not be on the phone right now, so they can tell us about that a little bit. Texas is doing this in its regions. Dallas has established a capacity like this at one of their large universities, the University of North Texas. And so there's different ways that this work is happening in states, but what we're excited to see is that it's beginning to happen and we're beginning to see different ways that it can occur. Next slide, please. So why is this different than what exists, right? And I've talked about this a little bit, but right now, what exists often in terms of reporting is that we're really focused on the needs of the feds, right? Getting WEO reporting in or making sure that we've got that IPEDS reporting in, but not really thinking about, okay, how is talent structured today and tomorrow in our state? And how do we make sure that we are responding to the needs that employers, that students, that workers have right now? And how also will we grow for the future and make sure that this is a good place to live going forward. And so we're really promoting that new thinking. This also, I would note that this isn't a state longitudinal data system, right? We talk a lot about state longitudinal data systems. At Strata, we think that's really important, right? It's essential to bring all of your data together and be able to use it for data and decision making. But this is really the analytics out of that, right? Making use of the state data that you have in a way that's actionable. So these two things, they could be combined like they are in Kentucky, or they could be separate like they are in Virginia and still be really useful to the state. So there's different ways to put that together. Next slide, please. We think that there are a number of key elements here, and I think that the word office is sometimes scary. We're using that in our terminology at Strata, but I don't actually think this needs to be a separate office. What this needs are the components listed here we think to be successful, and we're excited to see states experiment with this idea and this capacity so that we can learn more about how this can work in action, because right now, as I noted, there are only a few places with a capacity like this. So we think that this has to be sustainable. And the best way to do that is probably to establish a capacity like this through statute. There are some places that have also used executive order. Oklahoma has moved forward with an executive order to get this idea going. Um, but we think in some way this needs to be codified. We also think that it's important that a unit like this have governance. It's important that it be independent so that it can serve all of the stakeholders that are needed that need this resource right in a state, which can be the governor's office, the legislature, agencies, and regions. And that's really that wide variety of folks is who this capacity is focusing on in Virginia and also in Indiana, right? Thinking about this vast array to really understand the return on investment of education, to understand the talent needs, to understand how to get strong regional economies. And so this governance piece is important. In many places, we see this as taking the form of a nonpartisan board that might be made up of membership, including right legislative folks from agencies, people from regions, maybe institutional leaders, business leaders, and others. And we think this could probably be comprised in different ways depending on a state's needs. We also think that there needs to be a stakeholder agenda, that the staff of the office alone should not decide what the office does, but really that this should be decision making that happens in the state as a whole. Sometimes that might come in the form of legislation, right, where the capacity is listed, where the office is listed to deliver on a piece of legislation or provide information about a funding stream that's been put forward. And in other cases, it might be inquiry the state wants to do to make decisions about where to expand economic development, right? Site development, things like that, or where to focus new programs, or maybe even in some cases, right, where to condense and make choices about what education is offered in different areas of a state. And so we think an important need for the stakeholder agenda and for that also to be updated regularly. And in different places, I think this will be done in different ways, but probably 1 to 3 years is what we're thinking right now in terms of the right time frame. We also think that integrated and secure data is important, right? This office might not be the place where all data is combined. It might not be the state longitudinal data system. I think in most cases it won't be, but the office has to have access to data and be able to use it in order to do the work. And that data should be secure, have strong governance and privacy protections, and be a part of the other systems of data in the state. And finally, and maybe in some cases, the most important to get started, right, is that there are a dedicated staff doing this work. When I was hired in Virginia, it was a real privilege every day to wake up and know that my job was to think about the education and work pathways in Virginia. I wasn't mired in the need to do other things, right? And I could focus on that. And without the focus on that, right, it probably wouldn't have gotten done. And so we think it's really important that there are people who wake up every day and think about this directionally for a state. And I'll hand it over to my colleague in Virginia to provide an example of what's happening in Virginia.
Thanks, Heather. So next slide, Cody. Just to give you a little bit of an idea about VOE, as Heather mentioned, she was our first executive director in Virginia when we established that office. And it was established in 2021 through a code change. And I was actually with our state SHIO, the higher education organization at the time. And the concept of having an independent group really started at our higher ed coordinating board. But we also had at the time an the head of the Economic Development Partnership, which is where we're currently housed, also recognizing this need. And it was really born out of questions as we as a coordinating board were bringing forward programs that institutions wanted to have approved by us. And they would say, how do we know that this program is the next one that we need? How do we know that that the programs we're getting from institutions is going to fill a specific demand. Institutions would attest to that, but there was always a question or maybe just a concern that, were they doing it because that was something that, the institution had a lot of interest to do or expertise to do, but is this really going to fill a workforce demand? And in many cases, they had done a lot of work, but I think there was just this interest to have an outside resource to do that. And we had access to labor market data, but often, there's this translation need of how do you understand what that labor market demand data says in terms of high demand occupations, and then how that matches to degree programs and having an entity that could really serve in that purpose, which then the State Council had issued a report and worked with the economic development partnerships and then legislators, including Senator Hashmi, now Lieutenant Governor Hashmi, to really put forth a group like this, as well as other legislators in the state and the governor at the time. And so we are housed, as Heather noted, we are in an independent group. We are still part of a state agency. We're with the Economic Development Partnership. So that is the group that is charged with working with companies to attract and retain them in Virginia. And we're a unit within that organization. So we're still tied to the state government, but have an independent board. So our board is not, the president is not assigned by the governor. It's just a membership that's kind of got legislative representation as well as executive branch representation, as well as the business community. And there are several aspects where we're charged in the Code of Virginia, but also in budget to do certain actions. And a lot of it to me focuses on, how do we look at analyzing and serve as a consistent and impartial source of information that's looking at education and workforce alignment. We're also really looking at how we partner with institutions to help them. So we work very closely with our higher education institutions, our K-12, our labor market groups, and our workforce boards to really make sure we're serving their needs and being able to make sure we're helping them in the best way that we can and meeting them where they are. We also really need to focus on communication because a lot of times we have these conversations. We can create this great analysis, but if people don't understand or it's not communicated to them appropriately, then they really can't take action. So we really need to think about how to take complex topics and really break them down from a policymaker standpoint. What does all of this mean and how can you take action? And then we do have an annual reporting requirement to both develop a research agenda as well as provide an annual report so that we are accountable to the governor and the General Assembly in terms of what we are doing. So next slide. So in terms of some of our work and how we're guided with things, so as I mentioned, we do have legislation that guides our work. We've actually been named in certain programs, and I'll give some examples in a minute, that we are specifically asked to do reporting for these programs or look at an evaluation of the programs. We're asked to recommend new programs. We have a G3, which is our free community college for students enrolled in career and technical programs in high demand occupations. So every year we're asked to look at how do these programs relate to the high demand occupations, and are there ones that need to be added or removed? So how are we making sure we meet workforce needs is one of those examples. We also have a research advisory group that includes the Governor's Administration, the Secretary of Labor, Commerce and Trade and Education, members of the General Assembly, including, we reach out to the committees that are education and workforce committees, as well as staff to those committees and work with them. And then our key agencies are SHEV, our SHIO, the Higher Education Coordinating Body for Virginia, Go Virginia, which is a group that is designated to look at regional economic development, Virginia Works, which is the group that is administering the WIOA program, and our Employment Commission as well. So we have to work very closely with them and forming our research agenda each year. And I have one-on-one meetings with all of them, and then we also bring them together. We just had our most recent meeting about a month ago to start thinking about our work plan for the upcoming year. So we really feel that they are our customer base, and we're doing anything that they need us to do if it's not already said in the code or legislation. Next slide, please. So in terms of our research agenda, sometimes I think of those as broad questions that we're trying to answer to give some ideas for you of things that we've been talking about with our membership is. And I wonder if those listening have these questions in their state that we're being kind of looked at to ask and to answer. In the workforce areas, what types of workers and skills do employers need? And how can we answer that? We're looking at things like job posting data, which we have access to. We're looking at bridging that with demand and occupational demand data. And also, because we're at an economic development partnership, we're working actively with our business community to hear qualitative data in terms of what they're saying their challenges are. And one of the newer topics that I'm sure every state's dealing with is the impacts of AI. And so how do we know what the impacts of AI are, and what are we doing to get ahead? How are education programs aligned to meet the AI needs, and how are we future ready, which is a term we've been looking at. So kind of that bridge between what we know is coming and how that's aligned with what we're doing. And then one of the broader questions is always workforce shortages. And how are we addressing those needs? Where should we be making investments to help get more people and more workers into these different programs? On the education side, we are being asked questions like, how are these programs meeting workforce needs, and how can they improve? And then, of course, as I mentioned, the communication focus pieces is not just producing that, but how can we communicate that to agencies, to programs, to individuals, really so that they can take action. We don't want to produce reports to find out that they just kind of sit on a shelf. So how do we make those actionable, and how do we continue to communicate those findings or help those different user groups to be able to implement those actions? And then last, as Heather mentioned, we do really try to think about leveraging our existing data sources and really serving as a backbone for them. So states have invested in things like longitudinal data systems. We have something called a workforce data trust, as well as our labor market data. So we're often trying to say, this data has come from these systems, and we're showing the value of what those systems can do, so that there's an interest to maintain those systems, an interest for agencies to continue putting data into those systems, and we're kind of serving as that main user and communicator of the value. So next slide. Just to give you a few examples of the projects and partnerships that we've had for states that are interested in thinking about it is we have created a high demand occupation list that's been a dashboard. We work with the Board of Workforce Development. They needed some help in developing a high demand list, and so we worked with them. That was actually under Heather's leadership, and then we continued that support thereafter. So that's refreshed every 2 years. So we work with not only surfacing the data, but getting input from all key stakeholders on how that should look, what the data needs to include, and then also the criteria that should be used for that. So we do the back end support for getting that list to where it needs to be. We've also provided labor market profiles for new support programs. So I mentioned earlier, part of that original need for that the VOE was born out of was like, how do we know what these new programs that institutions want to have, that they're meeting workforce demand? So we had actually created a customized tool that as institutions are looking to start new programs, we create a whole profile for them. We can identify where these new programs map to what occupations, the occupational demand for it. We also show the regional analysis for who's offering those programs as well, so that they can see the growth of those programs by other education providers. And we also look at top skills based on job posting data, both technical skills and kind of those durable skills, the softer skills that are doing it. And so we highlight kind of what we're seeing in real time in the labor market as what's being demanded. And so we're really trying to provide them a comprehensive package and picture of what that degree program could serve and things they should be thinking about. We're also working on an industry-based certification directory. So really trying to think of, we have many providers, K-12, higher ed, our education training providers that are on the WIOA programs. They're all offering industry certifications, but one thing we found is across all of them, they're not well marked. So we could not tell you in Virginia how many welders were trained in programs, even though we know that about a third of them are happening in K-12. Another two-thirds are happening in our community college system. So we've created this whole directory to be able to link those two data sources together and then consistently map those to occupations so we know how we're filling demand both statewide as well as across regions as well. We've also been asked to do program evaluation. We have a statewide internship program we've invested pretty heavily in, and we've been asked to really help develop the goals for the program, monitor and track progress of the program, and really serve in an program evaluation role to help the agencies that are implementing it think about data on a continuing basis. And we're actually partnering with Strata, and I'll show you one of their dashboards in a minute on how we can think and visualize data in that realm. And then, as I mentioned, we have some dashboards and exploratory tools. So if you jump to the next slide, I'll give you a few examples of data tools that we've developed. And just to give you a feel for a few of the more transparent data that we've provided, in addition to those different things that I just mentioned. So in terms of dashboards, I mentioned the high demand occupation list. If you go on voe.org and hit data and dashboards, you can access all of these tools. But we have a high demand occupation dashboard. You can filter that by state, by region, and those regions include our workforce areas, our superintendent regions for the K-12, as well as the local Go Virginia area, some economic development areas. So there's a way to be able to look at that from different areas. You can also filter on the typical entry-level education. So you can look at occupations based on a typical entry level of bachelor's degree. You can also filter those based on some career clusters. So we're really trying to develop a tool that can serve a variety of user needs and let them understand what the labor market is demanding in their areas. It includes job openings, growth, as well as median earnings, so that people can kind of have a way to look at what's happening in their region and what's projected in the future. We also have an education and workforce alignment dashboard, which looks at similar things with the dashboard that has the demand, but also then blends in what education programs are serving that region and what the types of graduates are, and can give you trends in terms of certain clusters that those students are graduating from, both in the K-12, the registered apprenticeship, as well as the post-secondary realm. So it kind of can give you a picture of what's happening in your region. Next slide. Cody, would you be able to move us to the next one? I don't know if it's able to do it, but one of the next ones too that we have a dashboard on is, and this is one of the more novel pieces that I give credit to Heather's team for developing, is a college and career outcomes dashboard, where we worked with our State Council of Higher Education that matched over 647,000 records over 10 years, and looked at social media profiles as well as wage records and earnings to map where these individuals were going in terms of their first occupation. It also looks at them further out, up to I think it's 10 years, to see what pathways they're going into. And this one is giving you a picture, and it's got a lot of lines to it. And I know Heather's got some tools that she can demonstrate they've worked with in other states, but it gave us a better idea of, one of our top majors is psychology, and most states face this. And the question's always, well, what is it they go into, and how are they getting jobs? And what was great is it gave a lot of insight to find out more about these majors, and this one's showing liberal arts, of of the types of programs that they're going into and what occupations they're going into. And we can do that across all these degree programs. So it gives a lot of insights to help better understand where students are starting and where they're going to. I think there's always this interest to say, why don't we just get them to major in this? And that's not where they're going. But we are seeing them fill high demand occupations too. So how can we create those conversations? And I think there's a lot of resources and tools we've thought can be helpful to both help businesses to think differently about how they recruit individuals, as well as helping students understand other paths that they could take if they hadn't considered those as well, and how they could fill a need. Next slide. And the last one I want to mention, and because Strata does provide technical assistance, they've been a great partner with us, and we're really appreciative of the work that they have. But I mentioned this internship program. They've started to create dashboards using job posting data for us that has the supply and demand based on what employers are hiring in their area, both their first hires as well as internships that they're posting, and they can provide that to us by region and then map that with students that are potentially at institutions and trying to help us think about that. And this has been a really helpful tool for us to start working with that program I mentioned on an evaluation standpoint to really help be strategic. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be done in any one program, but we're trying to use data to help drive strategy and help start conversations. And so a lot of times we're thinking of these data and dashboards that you see to help support either agencies or programs and kind of really thinking through things and then being able to kind of come back to it and really reference those types of pieces. But we also kind of think of it as that these dashboards don't really stand on their own. They're always kind of combined with different communication strategies, different technical support to really help kind of drive that action that we're most interested in. So those are just a few things about what we're doing at FOE, and I know I'm going to turn this back over to Heather to kind of finish things out in terms of what they've been providing for technical assistance in other states.
That's great. And you can jump over to the next slide. So thank you so much, Wendy. So Strata is an educational foundation. We're a nonprofit. So what I'm talking to you about right now is not something that we're selling to states, but it's a service that we are providing at no cost to states who want to develop a capacity like this. And what we've done is within Strata, we've developed our own capacity like this, right? We're calling it a research and data lab to begin to help states who are interested in learning more about education to work information, building this capacity within their states, do this work. And we are providing technical assistance in three ways. I'm going to talk mostly about our technical services team, but I also wanted to note that we've helped states with legislation as they're moving forward to build a capacity like this, to think about writing that legislation, what might be in it, what's the right place in their state for this capacity, that kind of thing. So if that's of need in your state, we're happy to come in and provide support and guidance as you move forward. We've also helped states and are in the process of helping Indiana to begin to think about what would governance look like this for an office like this. What's the structure? How do you develop an initial research plan? Right, those different pieces of starting to just set up the office, staffing, um, uh, all of those considerations are things that we can come in and help you with as you move forward. And then finally, maybe the most flashy part, and for some the most exciting part, is that we've got this technical services area. And what we're doing here is we're trying to innovate and build tools that can be replicated in many places at a low cost so that states can start this work, right? Because beginning is sometimes the most daunting thing. And so what we want to show is that you can do this work whether you have a state longitudinal data system. If you don't have a state longitudinal data system, you can begin somewhere, and we're here to help you to do that. If you can jump to the next slide, that would be great. We jump to the next slide. We're a little bit late, so I'm just going to keep moving us forward a little bit. We're helping states as they think about different core areas of analysis. Wendy mentioned some of these, right? But we're thinking about in-demand jobs and skills, talent gaps, the economic impact of education, graduate return on investment, and what is true for all of us, right? That career paths are not linear, and we have to understand those career paths in order to create strong regional and state economies. And so these are all things that we're beginning to dig into, develop tools around, develop methods around, so that we can just port those to states, and they can begin to use this information to inform their policy and practice. And if you move to the next slide, that would be great. I've got an example here. I mentioned earlier in the presentation that the University of North Texas started this talent accelerator in the Dallas region. And Dallas is not a state, I know that, but it is a very large place. And I think what's interesting about Dallas is that this was a region, right? So it didn't have access to state data, it didn't have access to the state longitudinal data system. But what we did was we worked with them to get started on this. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples of how you do this. And I think the Dallas example is really nice to say that all you need is the will, the capacity, right, to move forward with this, from getting it started to actually getting products, and Strata can be here to help you along the way. So if you move to the next slide, I'll show you just a little bit of what we helped them to create, and this is still in process. So we're working with Dallas right now to do something like what Wendy showed you, right? This is a different version of that. Mapping of graduates from all of the institutions in their region into the degrees that they took, and then this looks particularly at the regions, right? Did they stay in the place where they were educated, or did they go someplace else? And that helps to understand, right, who's still here and from what majors they might be in, and then we can start to put together what that workforce looks like, where we see drain, and where we see people who might be employed in aligned occupations or who might be underemployed. Right? You can do a lot of digging once you've got a data set like this into questions of both policy and practice. And so this was done without any state data at all. We used social media profiles to do this, and we were able to create a picture that was actionable for this region. And so uh, I put this example up to say that you can start from almost anywhere. Next slide, please. This is the next step that we were able to do with this data. So we're getting better over time, right? As we do more of this, we're starting to innovate, and we can decompose these graduate outcomes to answer so many different questions, right? To get down to the schools that they went to, the majors that they were in, the jobs that they end up in, the locations that they're living in, so that we can really begin to parse together how does a region create that talented workforce for the future that they're going to need. And understanding what graduates do, because as Wendy said, it's not clear. Psychology majors don't always become psychologists, right? They do a lot of different things. Getting details on this information is really important to those questions. So Strata is here if you are interested in doing this work, if you want to talk further about what this might look like in your state, we're available to you, and I know our contact information will be shared after this. So thank you so much, and we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you both so much. So yeah, folks, please feel free to either raise your hand or type in a message in the chat. I know one question that we had for the webinar was about sort of the operational ownership of this system. So sort of, I know Wendy, you mentioned that y'all are housed in the economic development department, and so sort of, are there any issues that arose whenever it was deciding which sort of department this office would fall under, whether it's Department of Education, Higher Education Authority, things like that, or was there sort of collaboration and folks were willing like to share the data?
Yeah, I'll be happy to kind of answer for Virginia, and then I think Heather can share other states that she's worked with. In terms of where we were housed versus how we can get data and share data too, is I'll talk about where we were housed. I think for the most part, Virginia was pretty much in agreement to have it more on the economic development side, just because of, and I always say for states to be thinking about what their state structure is. For Virginia, we're a one-term, four-year governor. We have our legislature that's part-time. So those are always factors in terms of where should things be in terms of, with who's running something, in terms of, kind of how your governance works, as well as what your entities are charged to do. And our economic development partnership was charged to be looking at kind of working well with businesses. And that was a voice we really didn't feel like we had in Virginia. And so being able to kind of house us in the economic development partnerships gives us access to people who work on a daily basis with businesses. And that's really a key area of focus. In terms of sharing data, I think in states, we were talking about this a little bit earlier. We have not always had as much of an issue of sharing of data. I think it's more of getting through the biggest hurdle of most agencies are very concerned about protecting their data, and I think we really deeply appreciate and respect that. And that's why we often work through longitudinal systems, which are really kind of ideally, if they've been set up to make sure they maintain protections for whether that's students, whether that's individuals who've submitted personal information for a purpose that information is protected. And so often we're trying to work through the longitudinal data systems, which ideally has created an environment where agents feel comfortable sharing data versus us trying to get something directly. There have been cases where we are getting data directly, and often that we work with them, and sometimes they say, we need your help. We'll be able to provide this for you if you can help us. And so trying to find a way that they're seeing the value of what we can provide them. I think they're also willing to do that or be able to provide that through their longitudinal system. So, I mean, it always comes down to what's the why, and we have to think about that for the agency as well, so that they feel comfortable with what they're doing.
Yeah, and I would say as this capacity is being thought about or developed in other states, it's taking different forms. And I think at the end of the day, right, if this capacity gets developed in 50 states, it could look different in each one of those 50 states. And probably what has to happen is it has to fit into the culture of the place and also be a trusted um, source of information. And so wherever that is, in your state, that's probably the best place to put it. But some of the considerations as we've been talking to states about where they put this is that it might be valuable in some cases that it not be the education or training provider, right? That those who are offering the programming might not be the best to be the viewpoint on the outcomes of that programming. And so economic development can be a nice place for that. The other piece of the puzzle I think that comes up in conversations is that really the whole goal of this work is not to do reporting as usual, right? Just take a look at completion, but rather begin to understand how economies thrive and how students and workers operate in their local areas in their regions. And so sometimes, right, that means that putting it in a place like economic development or workforce might make more sense so that there's that focus beyond the completion element. So I think a lot of conversations are happening around the country with states that we talk to about the best place for this. The two places where this is legislated have chosen economic development as the spot, but I don't think that's probably the best place in every state.
And I might add one thing on the economic development side. There's never going to be a perfect fit. One thing on the economic development side that we hear about is our organization is really set up to attract and retain companies in the traded sector. So it is really looking at how can we get employers to locate in Virginia or that are here, how to grow or retain the workforce they have. It does not deal with kind of that non-traded, which is secondary markets, healthcare, education. Now, for us, our charge is to also include our work within that. And we do focus on it, but it's an example of no agency will be a perfect fit. And so just kind of recognizing that you kind of need to go with what the best fit is based on, kind of the governance of your state, what you're looking to accomplish, and then kind of have to work around some aspects of whatever that may be based on, kind of where you finally land on.
I think that's a great point, Wendy, and I think that's also pings to that idea of the advisory committee, right? That
Yeah.
you might put it in a place that's sort of imperfect, but making sure that there's a structure and a set agenda for the capacity or the office is really important, so that, right, it can serve all of the many constituents that it has to.
Awesome. Great. So building off that, is Indiana's model then uh, identical or very similar to Virginia's, or are there some key differences? I know you said it's housed in the same department.
Yeah, so Indiana's legislation is super new, right? Their session I think just ended a couple of days ago, and so the bill is just a couple of days old. It is the legislation has this office structured within economic development as well, within their economic development agency. And we are helping them to move that office forward. And so as that develops further, we'll begin to understand better the choices that they make about how this will operate. The legislation does say that there needs to be this steering committee or advisory group that supports it, and also identifies that they need to have a research agenda. And so there are lots of similarities to Virginia, but I imagine as it gets built and moves forward, there will be lots of differences as well. And so in a year, we'll be happy to come back to you and tell you what it looks like, and bring some folks from Indiana, and we can have that conversation.
Thanks. One question that came in, and I tried to write down a note about it. I believe, Wendy, you had mentioned that was it the high demand occupations dashboard is updated every 2 years? Um, are all of those dashboards and sort of the data that you're reporting on updated regularly, and is that something in statute?
The high demand dashboard is in statute. I think it's also now tied with WIOA requiring this, but in statute, our Board of Workforce Development is required to update. Some of our other dashboards we're updating based on when data becomes available. So we do, once the high demand was updated, anything that links to high demand in our other dashboards was updated. We also have a job posting analytics dashboard, which actually I think is refreshing quarterly based on job posting data that we're using through Lightcast. We kind of try to synthesize that, just look at trends by certain occupation clusters. So it does sometimes depend on how frequently we get data, but we do try to keep those dashboards as much in real time as possible, with the exception of the college and career outcomes, because that was a pretty comprehensive study that we had done, and that was done. I think the data is now about 3 years old, so we actually are looking to update that because we did pull all the graduate data. We mapped that with wages. We also looked at social media profiles and then kind of had to break that all down and clean up the data set. And that is something we're looking to refresh in this summer just to see what the newest outcomes data are.
Thank you. I think one last question. Did you run into any issues with the data from all the different partner organizations being um, collected differently or reported differently, and sort of was it your office's job to clean that data so that it was you could create these dashboards and these reports, or was that part of the process when your office was created that these different state entities had to report their data a certain way, or change the way that they collected and reported on this data?
Yeah, I think that's always a great question. It really just depends on the dashboard. The high demand occupation is really working off of labor market data. So we're using a lot of BLS and just kind of building off of that. So that one's a little bit easier. But some of our other ones are messier, and us working with agencies. And I think it raises a really good point. We really do try to think about data quality issues and work with the institutions to kind of clean up any data quality issues that we find, because often what's happening is data is being put into longitudinal data systems. If it doesn't get touched, you don't realize people aren't reporting. You don't know where anomalies are. So our best scenario we have is we're working on our internship program, and we've been working with our SHIO to look at kind of credit participation, and we recognize that, in some cases, because it's a very new program, which is not uncommon, that we likely had some underreporting by institutions because they may not have been coding something correctly. And so, the nice part about us doing this and looking at the data, we realize, oh, we've got some data quality issues, which again are very normal. But it gives that opportunity to go back and try to say, how can we get this better and create those conversations? And I will say, I didn't say it at the beginning, but one of the things I think is our main motto is we are here to help start conversations, whether that's improving data quality, helping build data capacity, helping to think about how a program could be better. As I don't think that the data is going to give a full answer, that there's conversations that occur around it to turn data into action or to help better understand what's happening, and that it just helps kind of ground in how you get started with conversations and help can guide strategy and can help think about what you might need to do for program improvement. Like I just mentioned with the internship, it's like, okay, let's start analyzing this program each year. And it's like, wait a second, it's not quite good enough yet. So let's kind of make sure we build into our next year's plan how to get better data quality. So there's just always different ways that we can be thinking about the use of the data to help a lot of different components that we are interested in as a state.
Thank you, Wendy. And Heather, thank you. I saw you in the chat you shared Indiana's bill. For anyone who was wondering, it was Senate Bill 254 in Indiana that passed this year.
And just a note kind of on the
Mhm.
Indiana pathway, it was two years of work to get it to this to building this capacity that is now going to happen at IEDC. And so there was a previous bill that 254 builds off of. I was just trying to look for that to give it to you all, but I can follow up and make sure that that gets sent out if folks are interested. But it was a multi-year process to build this capacity in a way that was feasible. So one bill builds off the other.
Perfect. And that goes back to what you were saying at first, that this was a sort of strategic thinking process, right? You can't just click your fingers and it's done tomorrow. It's sort of planning and sort of really ensuring that you have the right stakeholders, you have the right setup, and it fits your state's needs. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Absolutely.
And
All
I
right.
will note that we now are starting to be added to legislation when data analysis is needed. We were just put into legislation this year where the Board of Education, as well as the Board of Workforce Development, is supposed to look at kind of alignment of programs, particularly in industry certifications and K-12 CTE pathways. So the Board of Workforce Development is supposed to look at high demand and K-12 is supposed to look at that alignment, and we're really serving as that bridge between those. And we were written into that to provide assistance in that area because I think often they just know we can provide that connection between those two. So one thing we're starting to see is we'll be written into legislation as a resource and to be of assistance to agencies for those things.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. I know we're up on time, so I will be sure to follow up and share the Indiana bill, Virginia's bill, as well as y'all's contact information. Thank you so much, Wendy and Heather. And anyone listening, if your state's interested, please reach out to Wendy and Heather, and I'll share their contact information. I know Strata is available to help y'all with technical assistance and the analysis on this. And it's already spread to Indiana, and hopefully it will spread to more states around the South. So thank you both so much. Thank you everyone for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your Friday and have a great weekend. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.